feel like a big man every time we went fishing. So one day he asked me, he said, Diddy, can I have that watch? I said, no, little buddy, that watch has got so much sentimental value, I can't give that up. But I tell you what, when I die, you'll get the watch. He said, not the brothers? I said, no, not the brothers. He said, not Lucy? No, not Lucy. You'll get the watch, I promise. He said, shake on that, Dad, shake on it. So we shook on it, made the deal, put it up, went fishing that day, put it up in the closet, and it was probably 8 or 9 months later. One Sunday afternoon, I was in the bed, sick as a dog. Man, I had the flu. He come in there and put his little hand up on my head and said, Daddy, how you feeling? I said, I feel roughly, but he said, you tell Mama about the watch? Hey, you can't beat kids now. I'm telling you, they thinking all the time. That's what you got to do to be a good fisherman. You got to make preparations. You got to think. I would hate to be in this tournament. This tournament would be, these fish are not in one place that you go back to the next day and catch them. It is a moving target. There are people that have caught fish the first day and went back and fished that area for 2 hours and never got a bite, and the boat pulled in behind them and catch a fish. They weren't there when they were there, but they're moving. So one of the big things, I've been really getting involved with this collegiate and high school fishing teams. I think that is great. We got to grow our sport. We got to get our kids involved. We got to spend some time. I love these junior championship tournaments. I love being a part of that. We got to get our kids involved. But I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of information on the internet. There's a lot of things you can learn about techniques. And these kids are learning these techniques. And there are certain kids that can fish that they're better at the mechanics, at flipping, at pitching, at casting. They're better than I ever thought about being. I mean, it's unbelievable, all the different techniques, but they can't read water. They don't have a clue. So what they've done, they've learned techniques. And if those techniques are working, they're going to do good. But if they're not going to do good. I got a son named Ben, and he's on the James River right now practicing for the FLW tournament on the James River. It drives me nuts. He'll go out and catch fish. He fished on the Potomac about 5 weeks ago. They fished on the Potomac, and then he went to Champlain. Well, I talked to him at the Potomac, and he's catching fish. He's catching big fish in these 2 different bays. So when the tournament starts, first day he calls me, he's got a 10-pound limit. Well, 10-pound limit on Potomac will do nothing for you because everybody, there's 300 boats, they all going to have one. So I said, Ben, what happened? He said, well, I went into that area and I couldn't get a bite. So I made a run. I moved. I went down somewhere else. Well, how long did you stay in there? Well, I was in there about an hour, Dad. Well, what happened? Well, they moved. Well, where do you think they moved? Well, I don't know. Well, they didn't leave. They just changed. You need to be able to read the water to get a lure that would catch them for what they're doing now rather than what you did during practice. You need to learn how to read the water. You need to adapt. Why would you have left where fish were big enough that you could have won the tournament? But he don't know to read that water and change. I did a deal a couple of years ago with Bass Pro Shop and Coca-Cola, and they did a Hank Parker sweepstakes, and it was a Beaver Lake deal in July. You couldn't, oh gosh. I hate Beaver Lake in the summertime. I love it in the winter and the spring, but it's clearer than Dasani drinking water. And everybody's catching spotted bass deep, 60, 70, 80, 90 foot deep. That just don't suit me. So I go up there and I got these 2 guys who think that because I won a tournament or 2 that the fish are going to come out with their fins up. All we got to do is get in the boat. It ain't going to work like that. So I'm thinking to myself, man, I just hope we catch one where I won't be too embarrassed. Because this is going to be tough. Well, I'll go to the boat dock and I asked the guy, I said, what in the world can I do to catch fish? He said, hey, you ought to be happy. He said, they had 2.5 inches of rain yesterday in Arkansas, so you can run up this river, you can find some muddy water. Ching, ching, I'm liking this. So the next day I got these 2 guys in the boat and we run up the lake. And then we get into the river and we run more and more and more and more. And they're thinking, God, where are we going? But we finally get up there and I see where the water's starting to change colors and it's starting to mix and it's getting off color and I'm liking the way it looks and the water's really rising and there's a lot of foam on the river. So I know we got a lot of current, so a lot of water's going to be pushing up in those bays and coves. So I run in one cove and I look at it and I come out and I run in another cove and I look at it and I run in the third cove and we put the trolling motor down, we start fishing. Immediately we're catching fish. I mean, we're catching them. So after we catch 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 fish, one of the guys said, let me ask you a question. Why'd we come this far? I said, well, first of all, there's been a lot of rain up here. The further you go up the river, the more it chokes up, the more rising water you get, the more aggressive the fish get. We got off-colored water, and I like that rather than that crystal clear water. It gave those fish a reason to move up. Fish will always follow the water. It's very rare that water rises that the fish don't follow it. So it puts them on the move. And when they start to follow rising water, they get fresh bait, they get aggressive. So it's a good thing. So I go up there and he said, okay, I can buy that. We went in one cove and we came out of that cove. We came in another cove and we came out of that cove. And we came in this one, we started fishing. Why did we fish in this cove instead of the first 2 coves? I said, well, if you notice, the first cove we went into, there were no birds. There wasn't any seagulls, there weren't any herons sitting on the bank, there were no kingfishers in the trees, there wasn't any birds. We go in the second cove and there were a few. We come in this cove and I said, look at all the birds. Well, what's that tell you? It's where the bait is. You know, I was so overwhelmed. We talk about fishing Santee Cooper. That's where I grew up fishing. I told a story a while ago. The biggest string of bass I ever caught my whole life in a bass tournament, I caught in the Low Falls Landing Tournament at Santee Cooper in 1973. Billy Goff from Columbia, South Carolina had won every tournament in 1971, 72, and he was leading the tournament in 1973 when I weighed in. He'd won every single tournament. He weighed in 10 bass that weighed 44 pounds. I came in, I had 10 bass that weighed 73 pounds and 12 ounces. Biggest stringer I ever caught in a tournament in my life. Randy Horn came in, weighed in 82 pounds and blew me away. I did not win with 73-12. You never know. It's fishing tournaments. But the whole deal was reading the water and finding the fish. When I fished Santee Cooper, you know, we fished in water. We didn't really need a big hummingbird because we fished in water you could stick your rod in, and if it's 3 guys deep, you're pretty deep. Might want to shallow up a little bit. Well, I go to Lake Powell, Arizona, and you could put your hand on a bluff bank and be in 200 foot of water. Now, if you let that get to you, it'll overwhelm you. You'll think, well, man, I fish in off-colored water, I fish in shallow water, I fish around grass, I fish around cypress trees, and now, man, it's 300 feet deep right off the bank. I don't know what to do. But if you stop and think, fish look for food and cover. In that order, always, except during the spawn in the spring of the year. Fish are looking for food and cover. So instead of being overwhelmed at Lake Powell, I started riding around looking for bait. I'd look for them on my electronics, I'd look for birds, and I finally found the bait, and I just started fishing. Wasn't long, I ended up finishing 6th in that tournament, caught the biggest bass. I'd never caught a bass in my life over 30 foot of water. I caught a 7-pound, 12-ounce bass in Lake Powell, Arizona, and he was at least 80 feet deep. At least 80. I don't really know how deep the fish was, but he was at least 80 feet deep. First time I did it, but hey, it's food and cover. So you simplify things, don't get overwhelmed. But if there's one thing that I could tell you, one thing that I could share with you that would make you a better fisherman, I guarantee you this will work. I promise you this will work. Here's what happens to all of us. Every single person that fish, for whatever reason, we will establish a favorite bait. This is my favorite bait. This is my favorite technique. This is my go-to bait. If you'll leave that bait at home and leave its first cousin at home for a solid year, for 1 year, don't use the bait that is your go-to, that's your crutch, that's your fallback. Don't use your favorite bait. Leave it at home. You'll be a better fisherman. You'll learn to read water. A fishing lure is nothing but a tool. That's all a fishing lure is. We get all warm and fuzzy because they're really pretty, and oh, look at the eyes on this one, glass eyes. All that really is just decoration. You know, it's like a Christmas tree. It really don't matter. It's what's under it that counts. That's kind of the way a fishing lure is. You know, if you've got spark plugs that need to be changed in your car, and you go to an automobile mechanic, he'll use a wrench called a plug wrench. And he'll get those spark plugs out and he'll change them. If you've got a pipe under your sink at home and it's leaking, you call a plumber and he'll use a pipe wrench. Now, that plug wrench that the automobile mechanic uses, it won't work under that sink for your pipe. It will not work. Nor can you get that big pipe wrench under the hood of your car and change those spark plugs. They're two different tools for two different reasons, two purposes. That's what fishing lures are. They're different lures for different purposes. They're nothing but a tool. So if you start looking at your fishing lures, instead of getting all romantic about it and warm and fuzzy about that purple one with those green and glass eyes, and just start looking at them, hey, this is a tool to do a job. So the first thing that I do when I go into an area and I determine that's what I'm going to fish, that's where I'm going to fish, the first thing I do is what lure, what tool do I have that would most thoroughly fish this structure? What lure would allow me to fish the kind of structure that I've determined that these fish are in? And then you start going through the alphabet as you go down the line. And it's a process of elimination. I used to love tournaments when we had 3 days of practice, and then we'd have 3 days of competition. I love tournaments where you didn't get a bite in practice. 90% of the guys are defeated. They're so down in the dumps, they have no confidence that they're going to catch a fish. If you'll listen to these pros, a lot of times you'll listen to them and they'll say, man, we fished all day. We started out at 7 o'clock in the morning. You know, I didn't get a bite till 10 minutes to go and I caught these 3 fish. Most guys are beat. Most guys are beat if they fished all day and they don't have 10 minutes to go. They have no confidence, no enthusiasm, no expectations. And I promise you, that has a lot to do with how you cast, how much attention you pay to that lure. So you got to stay ready, you got to stay enthused, and you got to go through that alphabet. You got to start evaluating, and then you go right down the line. Well, I thought a spinnerbait bait would be the bait of choice because we got bait running up on the surface. We got a lot of fish in shallow water. I see them moving. I see a fish break. Spinnerbait will allow me to come through this grass or these lily pads or whatever reason you determine to use that particular bait. But if it don't work, hey, don't sweat it. You got some frogs. If it don't work, don't sweat it. You got some plastic worms. If it don't work, don't sweat it. You got some jerkbait. On down the line. Go through that process of elimination till you find that right tool. All the techniques in the world are good. I fished for 3 years. I did commentary for FLW. And I fished with almost everybody. And my job was to evaluate how they were evaluating the water. So I was to go on television and say, hey, I fished with David Dudley today, and David's put this together, and he evaluated this, and he determined this. Or I fished with Kevin Van Dam, and he did this. He used to fish FLW. He did this, he did that. I think he's got it put together. Well, I fished with all these guys, and some of them are not impressive. Dudley is a guy, I fished with him at the Atchafalaya Basin in Louisiana. And there was a point, and I knew there were a lot of fish on this point. And Dudley pulled up and he didn't make but like 2 casts. And he went on. I thought, wow, I don't think he knows what's here. I really think he missed this. And so at the end of the day, we come back in, I get the microphone out, and I said, well, David, let me tell you everything you found, where you're going to start in the morning. He said, well, I tell you, I didn't say anything about it, but there was one point back there on the river. It had 2 cypress trees on it. I said, wow. He said, I didn't say anything about it, but I had 2 bites. I made 2 casts, and I got a bite each time. He said, that's where I'm going to start in the morning. So the next day, he catches 22 pounds. I said, you catch him off that point? He said, all but one. So, but you wouldn't know that by his demeanor. You wouldn't know, you were not impressed with his casting ability, his pageantry, his showmanship. Not all that impressive. But that rascal can read water. He's very impressive at the scales. I fished a tournament myself at Lake Bistineau in Louisiana one time, and I had the first enclosed boat trailer. And it was a Cadillac. Man, I had a big Humminbird Ranger boat. I had a big enclosed trailer. The top slid open, the sides slid open, the bottom. This thing, I had rods and reels all over the wall. Man, this thing was awesome. Matching Suburban. I rolled in, there's a guy's got a little dugout Piru. And he looks at that and said, woo, look at here, woo. Brother, you got to show me what you got here. So I toured my boat trailer, and he was just pumped up. Well, we left. As fate would have it, we came back in at the same time. He had a boatload. I had not had a bite. And so, honesty sometimes is embarrassing, but it is what it is. He said, woo, he had his on a stringer. He said, woo, look here what I catched. I said, man, you catched them, didn't you? He said, yeah, woo, look at here. He said, what'd you do, brother? I said, I didn't get a bite. He paused for a minute, he looked at the trailer, he said, well, you look good coming. You know, hey, some days you got to work. But the thing about it is, when you don't get a bite on what you think should happen, you change up. And it isn't about your casting ability. It's about your ability to adapt and change and read the water. So if it's anybody that's going on the internet, they're reading about techniques, don't forget the most important thing. The most important thing is being able to adapt, read that water, because those fish, I won like 16 tournaments. I won the Classic twice. I had my career was a great career. I only fished 13 years, and I accomplished a whole lot of things that I'm very, very proud of. But I lost a lot more than I won. But I rarely ever went out and practiced and figured it out. It rarely ever happened like it happened in practice. It was always the changes that you made during the tournament that allowed you to win. So if you don't know how to read water, and if all you're going to do is flip, or all you're going to do is throw a spinnerbait, you're in bad trouble. Because rarely is that going to play out for you. A lot of people win one-day tournaments with technique. It's hard to do that in a 3, and like here we got a 4-day tournament. You got to qualify each day and got to make that cut. Hard to do that. If you're a one-dimensional technique fisherman and you make it to the level that this FLW Forrest Wood Cup is, you're in big trouble. You got to learn to read the water. And it's not that hard. It's food and cover, and evaluating and uncovering the right lure, the right tool to do that job. And it'll make all the difference in the world. And I'm going to tell you, I graduated. I got away from tournaments and went into television. And I love television. The reason I love television, no matter who I fish with, I edit. I win every week. And if I come down here to Murray and I don't catch him, we don't mention Murray. We put that over in the can, the cutting room floor, and we go on. So I'm going to look good. I'm going to look good every week. Oh, I ain't catching him, can he? Yeah, man, I'm tired of it. I love it. I fish with Bo Jackson. You know, Bo Jackson was the hottest thing since sliced bread. They were doing a big Nike ad campaign on television. Bo knows. I was in my office one day about 5:30, and at my place, when that 5 o'clock whistle blew, you didn't want to be at the door because they'll stampede you, getting out there, trying to get away from me. I done wore them out all day. But I was the only one there, and the phone rings. Bo Jackson on the phone. Well, I thought it was a PR guy that works for me playing a trick on me, And I said, there ain't no way this is Bo Jackson. But I didn't blow it. I said, Bo, let me get your number and I'll call you right back. I got a little something going on, just give me it. So he gave me his number and I called him back. Sure enough, it was Bo Jackson. So I went fishing with the greatest, hottest sports celebrity at that era of time. He was playing 2 sports. He was playing baseball for Kansas City. He was running back for at that time it was Los Angeles Raiders. And we went out and fished. He caught the first 3 fish. He said, man, we might have to rename this show the Bo Jackson Show. I said, Bo, I edit. And if you've never seen a facial expression, but he went from cloud 9 to the basement. He just realized, I got to catch 2 if he's going to catch 1. So it's exciting. Does anybody have any questions? I know I've talked a long time, but y'all at least didn't have to sit through Jimmy Houston, a 70-year-old man with bangs.
That's good. What kind of advice can you give us about reading blueback herring?
What kind of advice do I give you about blueback herring?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about Lake Murray and blueback heron, which is different from most lakes with blueback heron. What happened with Lake Murray is a unique situation. It's almost like a perfect storm. You had Lake Murray, you had threadfin shad, you had gizzard shad, then you had the introduction of blueback heron. Blueback heron became the primary source of bait. They thrive, they grow, they're the perfect size. They're just a great bait fish. And you had all this aquatic growth in Lake Murray. You had all these grass beds. Blueback heron love to be shallow and deep. They follow the plankton. There's two kinds of plankton. There's marine plankton and there's an aquatic plankton, and that plankton is what they feed on. That's what the heron feed on. So they love to be able to go from shallow to deep, deep to shallow. If you watch your electronic equipment in the afternoons, the screen will almost black out from the plankton in Lake Murray. There's a lot of good plankton in Lake Murray. Well, that's what the heron follow. Well, they got real adept and accustomed to work in those grass lines in 8, 10, 12 foot of water, and they would follow that plankton. Well, the bass, they lived in the grass, they fed on the heron. Well, then the Army Corps of Engineers came in and poisoned the grass. They didn't kill the grass, they poisoned the grass and they poisoned the fish. So all these bass that were living in this grass, that were so acclimated to this grass, is gone. It's like you left for work one day, when you came home, your house is gone. Where are you going to sleep? In the yard. Well, there's no structure there. That's where these bass are. There's no structure. They're very much accustomed to living along that grass line that's no longer there. So are these herring. So now these herring, they just roam. They're constantly on the go looking for the plankton. The bass are constantly on the go looking for the heron. So the bass are moving, the herring are moving, and the whole thing is just one big moving target. If you watch the scores, if you go to Deer Island and you watch the scores, not in this tournament, but in the local tournaments, you'll have a local guy that'll catch 27 pounds and win the tournament. The next week he'll zero. Happens all the time. And he'll fish those same areas. They're great areas, but the fish didn't show up. It's about timing. So Murray is unique to any lake. I fished in 45 different states and 3 foreign countries, and there's no lake for me as difficult as Lake Murray. This lake beats me about the face and head. I go out one day and I can catch them. I go back 2 more times in a row and I don't get a bite. Just drives me nuts. But these fish just follow. It's a tough one. It really is a tough one. Hartwell's different. Hartwell's got structure, and the herring relate to different structures. So you can still fish spots on Hartwell a lot more effective than you can on Murray. Murray's unique because of the way they kill the grass. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
You always hear someone say it's a herring bite. It's crawfish to eat bluegills. How does one know what they're eating?
Yeah, he said a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the herring bite, or it's crawfish, or it's bluegill. How do you know what they're feeding on? The herring dominate heroin. You got that? I see that. That's all a joke, because this morning we're doing the morning show and Chris Jones said heroin. I was, wait a minute. Are we talking about drug addicts, or are we talking about bass fishing? But so I started cutting up. Every time I'd say it, I'd say heroin. But so it bit me. But the herring is what these fish dominate on. That is their bread and butter. If they run across a crawfish or a bluegill bed, then that's good. That's kind of like a bonus for them. But they're really primary source of food, and what they really, really focus on are the herring. Yes, sir. What's that? How's the herring fishing at Santee Cooper? I thought you said I'm a state trooper, and you said heroin, I need to talk to you. I was getting really nervous, you know. I'm deaf. Oh, I thought, well, no. The herring fishing at Santee Cooper. Santee Cooper is somewhat like Murray, except it's so much shallower, and there's so much structure that is still there. You got a lot of stumps, you got a lot of cypress trees, you got the river, you got riprap, you got so much more to offer in the way of shallow water structure in Santee Cooper, but it's still tough, and the herring travel, but a lot of times at Santee, those fish will just kind of hang in there by those cypress trees, and they're just not very active until the shad or the herring come through. I'm going to get locked up yet. Anybody else have a question? Just say no to drugs.
The other day I was watching, I think it was like the second day of the tournament, the pros, and threw his bait out, he had a good hit on the spinner bait, and then picked up another rock with a different bait to throw back in and caught the fish. What determines on what you use to place it?
He was talking about he threw, you saw a pro throwing a spinnerbait, and he got a strike, and he missed him on the spinnerbait, and he didn't even throw the spinnerbait back at the fish. He threw that rod down, he picked up a different rod, and threw a different bait and caught the fish. I'm going to tell you, I can't tell you how many times. I drew a pro named Basil Bacon one time, and Basil was throwing a big spinnerbait, and I think he got 14 bites that day and only caught 2, and I didn't get a bite on my own, but I caught 12 fish behind Basil Bacon's spinnerbait with a jerk bait. He was fishing a big, heavy power bait, and I would come back with a little finesse bait, and those fish wouldn't come back at his spinnerbait, but that little finesse bait would trick them into biting. So that is a very common thing. If I'm fishing a bait like a big, heavy jig or a spinnerbait or a big, aggressive crankbait, and I get a bite and I don't catch that fish, I won't throw that big bait back. I'll throw something a little bit more of a finesse style, like a sinking worm or something of that nature. I don't know how we're doing on time. Are we late? Are we early? Or where are we? We're about 2 minutes past time, so we got time for one more question.
Do your kids tournament fish?
Her question to me is, do my kids tournament fish? My kids took my advice, and I could stomp my own foot about don't get a job. Man, alive. It is unbelievable, It's kind of like, kids are like puppies and kittens. They're so cute when they're little, but they kind of become cats and dogs after a while. I love my kids. We have a great working relationship. I have 2 sons, my oldest 2 sons, Hank Jr. and Billy. We host hunting shows together. We have a great time traveling the country, doing our hunting shows. My second son, Billy, is a twin. His brother's 5 minutes younger than him. His name is Ben. He is fishing FLW circuits. We would call it the Everstart, but I've been corrected. It is the FLW series by Rayovac.
Okay.
And so he's fishing in that series. And then I have my youngest son, and my sweetest, mild-mannered son is an MMA fighter. So I don't know, just go figure. He's got 2%. Look at me. He's got 2% body fat. He can probably jump up here and grab this ceiling and hold with one hand. And he's always been the most mild-mannered kid. I don't know. And then I have a daughter, Lucy, and she is a member of PETA. So we have great Thanksgiving dinners. She's eating broccoli and we're eating venison.
Yeah.
Works out good. Hey, you guys have been great. I love being close to home. I love being a South Carolina resident. And we have got a shootout, boy. I tell you, I hate to pull for anybody. I wish everybody could win. But I don't know if you know, and I'll tell it quickly, the Anthony Gagliardi story and what an incredible story that is. He was disqualified in the very first tournament, so he got a 0. And so he's starting out with 0. No one's ever done that. No one's ever qualified for the cup that started out deep in a hole, even 200 points behind, let alone 0. So Anthony, he had a co-angler that was signed up and qualified for the Everstart division, but was not signed up for the FLW. Just a crazy technicality that no one ever thought about. But the one thing that I will tell you about BASS and about FLW, their rules are their rules. And it doesn't matter how sad it is, it doesn't matter how narrow it is, a rule is a rule. And you violate that rule, and you're going to pay the ultimate price. And that's what happened to Anthony. So it was almost impossible. He could not have, in 5 tournaments, he could not have one bad day. He wouldn't be here. If he would have had one bad day, Anthony Gagliardi would not be in this tournament. So with all that adversity, and he's had trouble. He had a child that had some sickness, and he had to withdraw for a couple of years. And so I am really excited about his chances. I want everybody to win, but I am really pulling for Anthony. I think it'd be awesome story to tell if he could overcome all the adversity. You guys are great, so enjoy the weigh-in and pull for whoever you like, but I'm rooting for Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I better get that.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
you're
That was
welcome.
awesome.
Thank you. Hey, buddy.